All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Megan Cole, and I have the pleasure of representing Travel and Tourism Research Association, or TTRA, today. We are excited to welcome the awesome Bala, Vice President of Research and Development at Longwoods, who will be discussing how to defend your tourism budget. I hope you all enjoy today's webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. The amazing Claire and Kelsey will be here to help answer them. And now, hats off to you, Bala. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. This is actually my first webinar in 3 years, so I couldn't be more excited to connect with all of you guys. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that the content I've prepared should take roughly 35 to 40 minutes. After that, we'll have some time for questions, and if there aren't any, I'll be happy to give you some time back in your day. So we all know that we're living in some uncertain times. And that makes defending your tourism budget more challenging than ever before. Now, while I'll share some insights and metrics, what I really want you to focus on today is the emotional side. From what we've seen across the board in the past few months, is that it's more about tapping into how people are feeling right now rather than just focusing on your traditional data points. So I want this to be a conversation about how we can navigate these emotional currents and still make smart decisions with the information we have. A little about myself. Bala, Vice President of Research and Product Development at Longwoods. I've had the pleasure of serving the travel industry for the last decade or so, during which I've been the primary client service manager for over 70 destinations. Some of you guys know me as your primary account manager, maybe. Um, but that role has given me the opportunity to participate in some intense board meetings where we present our case, but I also get to observe what truly engages the board members. I focus a lot on the psychology behind what inspires them. And over time, I've shifted away from delivering analytic heavy reports to more concise data storytelling. So, this approach excites our clients, gives them the ammunition they need, and also creates a memorable narrative. So, for this webinar, I want to bring that same blend of stories and metrics. While the metrics are essential, our focus today will be on how to frame those numbers and how to craft that narrative that resonates and drives action. So, we have all seen the news recently with Brand USA, we've seen it with Florida, other regions, that the questions about tourism budgets aren't hypothetical anymore. In some cases, the cuts are already happening. We've all been in these tough conversations where every dollar is being questioned, the value of tourism is put under a microscope. Today, those conversations aren't hypothetical. They're happening in boardrooms and legislative chambers across the country. So, our challenge here is to move beyond simply defending our budgets and instead proactively prepare for these difficult discussions, arming ourselves with the data, stories, and strategies that will help us protect the resources our communities depend on. So, our game plan today is twofold. First, we're going to show you the proof in action with a case study from Colorado in the 1990s. Their tourism budget was cut, and the aftermath showed just how impactful those cuts can be. It's one of the most downloaded case studies on our website, and for good reason. Once you understand that particular story, you will have a powerful example to reference when those tough questions come up in your budget meetings. The second is about building your own playbook. While you could present dozens of metrics, we wanted to highlight four strategies that resonate the most with stakeholders. These are metrics and strategies that can help you effectively defend your budget in these challenging times. Now, I want to caveat that this is, you know, this might be, those metrics might change a little bit differently for your situation, but the framing of or understanding how others have done it could help you reposition some of that for your next board meeting. So we'll start with our case study. Our case study is called The Rise and Fall of Colorado Tourism. And I added a second rise in there since they did bounce back after the fall. We're going to explore the entire journey of what happened, starting in the 1980s when Colorado Tourism Office really began to take off. Now, before we dive in, I have one confession to make. After saying Colorado about 100 times while preparing for this webinar, I've discovered that it's a real tongue twister for me. So if you hear me slip and say CTO for Colorado Tourism Office, that's just me giving my tongue a break. Consider it a win-win for both of us. So the story of Colorado tourism started all the way back in 1983. And we were fortunate at that time because Longwoods was getting involved in the tourism space. And we were hired to do a crucial research that shaped the state's image. When we initially summarized the perception of Colorado, it was about mountains, mountains, and more mountains. That's how the entire visitors were looking at Colorado. Our recommended strategy was to reposition Colorado as mountains and much more, with the much more to be determined by research. Our goal was to give them the top hot buttons in terms of what people wanted from a Colorado vacation, and we suggested building on their natural strength as the iconic Rocky Mountain experience, but moving the mountains to the background with people, fun, excitement, and attractions in the foreground. By the 1988, the Colorado Tourism Office budget was renewed for the first times, and things were going really great. By 1992, Colorado, which was always known as a ski resort, actually moved up to number 5 among all 50 states as a summer resort destination. Then in 1993, they hit number 1 in the country for summer tourism. However, in the late 1993, the voters decided to eliminate the budget entirely. In a flash, it went from 12 million to 0, and the impact was immediate. By 1994, Colorado slipped all the way down to number 17 in the summer resort destination category. So you can see how fast things changed when the budget disappeared. Now, the opposition for the tourism tax, they said it's not that we are against tourism, but the Rocky Mountains were there long before Colorado Tourism Board, and they'll be there long after. Surely the tourists will keep on coming, right? How many times have we heard this argument? Just because a destination has natural beauty or certain attributes, there's often this natural assumption that tourism will thrive even without marketing. And did it? Let's look at the Colorado case study. Let's look at the immediate aftermath after the marketing budget vanished. As we discussed, their rank as a summer resort destination plummeted from number 1 to number 17. We saw a shift in the type of visitors they were getting. There were more regional visitors coming in instead of the national fly-in tourist that they had been attracting thanks to strong marketing. And top of that, our survey showed an increase in VFRs, visiting friends and relatives, rather than the high-yield customers who would typically stay in hotels and spend more money locally. In fact, we saw in the TravelUSA survey, the longest running of its kind, that as soon as the budget was cut in 1994, Colorado's share of US overnight leisure trips dropped significantly. So, what were the consequences of those budget cuts? Colorado lost 30% of its market share in the next 2 years, over $1.4 billion in annual visitor spending was lost in the next 2 years. And that loss eventually grew to $2.4 billion by the late 1990s. Finally, that drop in visitor spending led to more than $134 million in lost state and local taxes between 1993 and 1997. There's a famous quote in our case study that sums this up really perfectly. It says, "It was like owning a Ferrari, but not having enough money for gasoline." Luckily, this wasn't the end. Just like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the Colorado Tourism Office budget was renewed for $5 million in July 2000 after a 7-year hiatus. Even though the marketing budget was less than half of what it used to be, CTO was back in business. So, how did the budget get renewed? After years of losses and lots of media attention, Longwoods was hired to do a white paper to review the situation. That white paper was distributed to legislators and the media, and finally, the marketing budget was renewed for $5 million. It was more than a 50% reduction, but like I said, CTO was back in business. But this time, they did something different. The way that they showed marketing performance and the metric they used was different. They showed tax dollars returned for advertising dollars invested as their primary metric. They demonstrated a strong ROI of almost 13:1. And that is kind of like the key takeaway is they understood the situation with the residents and the anger about increased taxes. And they wanted to make sure that the metric represents and resonates with that particular audience. By showing an almost 13:1 return, Colorado proved that they had a clear understanding of how to market their destination. In fact, the governor was impressed with this performance that he approved a one-time $9 million capital boost for tourism promotion. It wasn't added onto their budget. It was just a one-time thing, but we'll still take it. So what did they do with this new influx of money? Their marketing the next year brought in 5.3 million incremental trips due to advertising. Those trips brought about $1.4 billion in additional visitor spending into the state and generated about $90 million in additional state and local taxes. The marketing was a huge success, but Colorado stayed true to their metric. While these metrics were reported out, their main metric continues to be their tax ROI. Their tax ROI actually increased from 13:1 to almost 18:1. In fact, the success was so overwhelming that in 2006, the marketing budget was officially signed into law for about $19 million, almost 4 times what it was back in 2000. So, what have we learned from all of this? And the Denver Post captured it brilliantly with their quote. The moral of the story is that in the modern tourism economy, it's not enough to have a spectacular scenery, you also have to advertise your product. So now that we have explored the Colorado case study as a success story, let's focus on how we can build a case for our own tourism budget. It's all about tailoring the strategy to our unique strengths and challenges. So think of our strategy like a Swiss Army knife. We've got a range of tools and metrics we can use, but from our experience, there are 4 key elements that really stand out for building a strong case. First is show me the lift. That's about demonstrating clear, measurable impact. This has become somewhat of a common practice in the tourism space. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'll show you maybe one slide. But I want to focus in on the next one a little bit more, which is the bottom line, making sure that every dollar invested ties back to economic returns. The third is know your rivals. We need to understand what other destinations are doing, how we're comparing against them. And finally, the hometown advantage. This is not just about making visitors happy, it's about how this investment benefits our residents and our community as a whole. So let's start with show me the lift. This is the classic answer to the question that we always get. How do we know that our marketing made a difference? This is where having a control group becomes critical. By comparing people who saw our campaign with an identical audience that didn't, we can show true behavioral impact. Without that control group, it's nearly impossible to prove our campaign's true influence or defend the results. As I mentioned before, this approach is becoming standard in DMO reports. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Just know that it's a vital metric to have in your toolkit. And next is about the bottom line. That's your return on investment. Most of us are familiar with this, but remember there are different ways to represent ROI depending on what resonates with your audience. You can show visitor spending per ad dollar, how much visitor revenue is generated for every dollar invested in marketing. You can show tax dollars per ad dollar, how much in destination taxes is generated. You can add in that lift metric that I mentioned and create an incremental ROI and an incremental tax ROI. The key is not to overwhelm them with numbers, but use the metric that's most impactful for your audience and shows your campaign's success as undeniable. I want to talk about one particular moment that happened a few years back. I was in a board meeting where we were presenting the results of a really successful marketing campaign. We had a solid deck, and the big moment was somewhat similar to this slide, where we're showing our efforts delivered an incremental tax ROI of 10:1. I'm going to be honest, I was expecting a big reaction, maybe some applause, or at least a few enthusiastic nods. But instead, we got a polite smile and a quick move to the next slide. Then something interesting happened. The research director kind of stood up and reframed the exact same result. And suddenly the room leaned in. People started asking questions. The tone completely shifted. Before I show you what he did, I want to take a quick detour into a psychological study from the 1970s that explains why that shift in framing made all the difference. In the 1970s, there was a famous behavioral study. A group of people were gathered into a room. They were given a scenario. Imagine you're a public health official dealing with a deadly outbreak affecting 600 million people. You have two choices. Program A, 200 million will survive for sure. And program B, 1/3 chance that everyone will be saved. Now, I'm going to give you guys about 10 to 20 seconds. You guys can choose program A or program B. Let's see how your results compare with what happened with this particular study. So you can either type it in the chat or keep it to yourself. Hey, I'll probably choose program B or I'll probably choose program A. We'll give it about 5 more seconds. Okay. If you chose program A, you are among the 72% that did. 28% chose program B. They rather save the 200 million people for sure. And then what they did was they took the same scenario, but now your choices are a little bit different. You have two programs now, program C means 400 million will die, and program D is still same, 1/3 chance of saving everyone. Again, I'll give it about 10 seconds. You can either choose program C or program D. Let's see if your choices match with the results. You can either type it into the chat or keep it yourself. 3 more seconds. Okay. Now, suddenly, the riskier option actually looks better. 79% chose program D and only 21% chose program C. Here's the interesting part. Both program A and program C are essentially the same thing. Of the 600 million people, you can save 200 or you can lose 400. But overwhelmingly, how people respond is different. When people sense a potential loss, they become more willing to take risks or listen to alternative options. That feeling of loss changes the way we think and makes us more open to taking chances, taking risks, listening more, leaning in. And that's exactly what happened when that research director reframed the metric from a potential gain, again, 10 is to 1. The way that he reframed it was he said, you know what this means? This means that if we as an organization didn't exist and we didn't do any marketing, we would have lost $8 million additional tax revenue for this destination. And that's what got the stakeholders kind of leaning in and asking questions. We did that. We generated that much. Oh, that's our impact. And that's kind of like the bottom line. It's not about having the metrics. It's about reframing them in a way that resonates with your audience. If you're talking to the resident, for example, in the case of CTO, they knew that it was important to show the tax savings or tax ROI. You're talking to like a CEO here in this particular case who was worried or who didn't kind of get that point. Maybe you want to make that big statement. Hey, we didn't do any marketing. We would have lost 8 million in additional taxes. And that's one way to get and ensure that you're having a conversation in those budget conversations. So the next one we're going to move on to is called Know Your Rivals, what I call as the success metric paradox. The reason I call that is because whenever I've presented a metric, in this case, let's take 82% trip satisfaction in your destination. Whenever I've presented it, the first question that comes back from someone on the other side is that good? How do we know? And that's why I recommend the power of providing context. So instead of just showing your number, if you had your number that says, hey, yes, our trip satisfaction rate was 82%, but our immediate competitor was 75%. So we did better. But our aspirational rival perhaps is doing at a 90%. So we still have things to improve. This shows where your marketing is working, where you need more funds, where having those funds could help us get to that place. On the flip side, think about when you're seeing an occupancy or a revenue drop, and that looks scary. And if you know that your competitors are facing the same challenges, that context can help you position yourself. You can say, yes, it's down, but it's not just us, it's industry wide, and we're actually doing better than the average. By providing this particular context, we've seen that our clients really benefit. It's not about how you're doing alone. It's about how you compare to your competitors and the industry. And the final strategy that we've seen working, and what I call the hometown advantage. And this is all about how your residents view tourism. You can have residents who are welcoming and understand the value it brings to the community. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going in there, everyone who's coming to Toronto and saying, hi, welcome. These people are too nice. But if I'm going to a conference and someone's asking about Toronto, I brag about it. Yeah, you should come and visit the distillery district. Oh, yeah, you should come and check out our cuisines. So that's what I mean by your residents becoming welcome. Or you can have a situation like what we're seeing in Barcelona, where locals are actively pushing back, even with water guns, against tourists. If your residents feel that tourism is a burden, that's going to create challenges when defending your tourism budget. So, how do you turn this resident sentiment into a strategy? You need to ask yourself these critical questions. Do your residents see tourism as a positive force? How well are you communicating the economic contributions and the cultural contributions you're doing by bringing people in? At Longwoods, we do an annual national resident sentiment survey. We do it every July, and our 2025 one is going to go out in the next 2 weeks. We present the results late August in partnership with DI. So this is the results from last year's July. And you can see when we ask the question, my local government is doing a good job in balancing resident quality of life and visitor satisfaction. 43% agree. That's up from 36% in 2023. But when we asked about the downside, whether the tourism is driving prices up, 43% agreed. And that number is climbing, especially in the southern and western regions. Almost 50% on the western regions are saying that the tourism is causing prices to rise, making it less affordable. And if you think this is not going to come back to you, think a little bit again, think back to our Colorado case study, where residents were given an opportunity to vote on the tax. They saved about per million in annual tourism tax because they defunded Colorado tourism. But what they lost was about $2.4 billion in annual revenue. I'm not going to make you do the math, but for every $1 that they saved, they lost $200 in revenue. And here's the kicker in all of this. Our founder, when he was very much involved in this entire process, he found out that Colorado voters already understood the importance of tourism. They just didn't want another tax. What they didn't realize was that the existing tax was paid by out of state visitors and not locals. And once that was explained, they actually supported the tax and even thought it was too small. And that's the power of communication and understanding resident sentiment. If you keep your community informed and engaged, you can turn that into an advantage and you can turn that into an asset. Think about going to meetings and saying, our residents want us to do this. And I'll finish with one final point here is again, Kathy Ritter, who was the research director, good friend of mine. She mentioned that it took Colorado about 25 years, leading about 20 to 15, to get back all the market share they lost in the 1990s, right? So when you're thinking about your next presentation, again, use that case study, use that example, that if we lose the market share now, it's going to take years for us to get that back. So here's a quick summary of what we have learned so far. We've seen the Colorado story. They eliminated the budget. The result, they dropped from number 1 to number 17 in the summer resort category. They lost $2.4 billion in visitor spending, but they came back strong. But more importantly, they reframed their success metrics, focusing on tax ROI and made a stunning recovery. I've also given you some strategies. This is not everything, but it's about understanding that, hey, do we have these strategies in our back pocket so that when the time comes, we are ready with our data sets, we are ready with our story, we are ready with our narratives. And I'll leave you guys with one again quote. This still stands to this particular day, that it's not enough to have a spectacular scenery, you have to advertise your products. Thank you all. As always, our case studies are available on the website, and we're happy to answer any questions. Really appreciate your time.